Hello everybody. Today's lesson's on angiosperms, which are the flowering plants. Now these are the most successful and advanced group of plants on the planet. And the reason they're so successful is not because of their newest adaptations, which are flowers and fruits, but it's because they kept every useful adaptation from groups of plants that have evolved before them. For example, the ferns were the first to have vascular tissue, which helped ferns grow taller than the mosses. Vascular tissue was a useful adaptation, was passed on from the ferns to the gymnosperms and finally the angiosperms. The gymnosperms were the first to reproduce with seeds, which again, a useful adaptation because no longer did sperm cells have to swim to the egg cells using water that was in the environment. Now we could put the sperm cells inside pollen grains and send them through the air, either by wind or carried by animals. The newest adaptation that allows the angiosperms to be more successful than the gymnosperms, though, is the evolution of flowers and fruits. Now, Amberella trichopodia is the flower that we see right here, and scientists believe that this is the relative of the very first flowers that evolved 160 million years ago. Right? It's very different than the flowers that we see today, where they're not big and bright and colorful. They're small, and they're probably just white. However, it was different enough to attract some insects to visit this flower and carry the pollen, and using insects to carry the pollen happened to be much more efficient than relying on the wind to blow those pollen grains exactly where you needed them to go. So let's talk a little bit about the reproduction of angiosperms. This is really just a review because we talked about reproduction of flowering plants at the beginning of the semester. But when you look at the gametophyte generation in angiosperms, it has shrunken down, so now that the gametophyte, the male gametophyte, is basically a pollen grain, and the female gametophyte is where that egg is produced in the base of the flower. Now we know that the purpose of the flower is to attract insects and other animal pollinators. Right? Those bright petals act as like an advertisement, so it catches their eyes. And then, a lot of times these things are scented or filled with nectar, has something to entice and reward these organisms for visiting the flower. And as they visit the flower, they unknowingly get covered in pollen and carry that pollen from flower to flower. Again, you can trust this little bee to carry these pollen grains directly to another flower. You can trust that bee more than you can trust the wind to blow them in the proper direction. And that's why animal pollination is much more efficient than wind pollination. After pollination has occurred, we have fertilization, which is the combination of the sperm cells and the egg cells, and now that flower petal falls apart and the ovary of that flower swells up and becomes a fruit. Remember, the whole purpose of fruits is to help disperse the seeds, which are inside of it. So here we have the fruits of a betel nut palm. It's a super bright red fruit that again is meant to be very, very attractive to animals. Now this isn't a fruit that you would eat, but something that grows naturally in tropical Asian countries. And if you were to just put this in your mouth and chew it, it would have an effect like a combination of strong caffeine and chewing tobacco. It's a very, very powerful stimulant. But like chewing tobacco, it causes you to spit. So in countries where this betel nut palm tree grows native, you see all these signs that warn against betel nut chewing, and it's not because it's dangerous to your health and it causes cancer, and it absolutely does cause cancer, but that's not the purpose of this sign. But when you spit, it has this bright red spit. It kind of looks like blood spatter if you were to spit on a sidewalk. So when you walk down the sidewalk of countries where this plant grows, it kind of just looks like there's blood splatter all over the place, but it's really just people spitting out this betel nut palm fruit. So that's it for today's lesson, guys. Have a good one.